Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Mark Testoni, CEO at SAP NS2, the U.S. arm of SAP, to discuss the shift to remote work and the impact of cloud computing, data, and security. Mark, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
How is the global shift to remote working impacting the value of the cloud computing industry?
You know, Jill, it's having a profound impact and a couple of different dynamics. I mean, because of these kind of applications that we're on today, whether it's Zoom, Teams, Slack, whatever, the expansion of this capability is driving more and more capacity and use in the cloud. But I think there's another nuance going on here that we're going to see. We often hear people talk about, let's get back to normal, like what it was back in early 2020 or 2019. We're in the new normal. And what's going to happen is those great things that we've watched for the last 15 years in my mind, which when we got off the Blackberries and went to the smartphones, we're going to see that same thing happening. We don't even recognize the applications that come along because we're going to morph and change the way we work every day. Work being an activity, not a place, right? We're going to change the way we work in different ways. That's going to look a lot more like the way we operate our personal lives, which were transformed digitally long before some of this work stuff. So I think it's going to blend itself. Tremendous amount of capacity is going to be required to do this. And the cloud models will shift as well.
Has this shift contributed to an explosion of data?
Well, digitization in general has. And data is a good thing, particularly if you can turn it into information that's actionable. And we look at what's going to change in the cloud perspective as it relates to this, in my mind. Think about 5G, which is some people call the fourth generation industrial revolution, right? And what's going to happen there is we're going to take data that's largely been centralized in a lot of ways through the first 30 years of the internet. We're going to redistribute it where it can be acted on even more. And the spokes in this hub and spoke model will become much more rich in data and executables. And that's what's going to allow us to do things like autonomous kinds of activities and robotics, and really create ways that things that we can't even conceive right now.
I would imagine there's been an increase in demand for secure cloud.
We see the secure cloud being hugely important. It's kind of the business we're in, not only from a government perspective, but a lot of the regulated industries and the data that you talked about earlier. It's not only just privacy data, it's the importance of data, whether it be intellectual property of companies and other things. So we are seeing a great expansion in this area. And it's not that clouds generally are more secure than distributed, hosted or other environments, because there's a set of standards around them and you can apply security more uniformly. But then when you add the layering of government kind of federal government kind of standards on top of that, for the most part, which are pretty good, it really adds to the mix. And so we're seeing a tremendous amount of demand, not only in government, but say in regulated industries, aerospace and defense, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, other places like this, and global government.
Mark, how and why are enterprises moving to the cloud, and what benefits are they seeing?
I mean, you're almost forced to move to the cloud today, but the benefits really kind of fall into three major buckets. One, there's a cost and configuration savings, and it's not just about, okay, I can get a cheaper cloud provider and therefore I can do it cheaper. It's bringing more standardization. There's an innovation path that's important to it. You really can't do some of the innovation at the enterprise level unless you are in the cloud. So those two are probably the most important factors. And third, there's a security element. I can increase and wrap more security around it. Some people would argue that, well, it seems like if we put everything together, it's going to be less secure, or it actually doesn't work that way. You can manage risk better in the cloud. So those three things drive it. And kind of the icing on the cake is we need cloud structured computing or more common and computing structures like this to be able to create the innovation that's going to drive the future for us.
And Mark, you had mentioned the government getting into cloud. What role does cloud computing play in the government space?
Well, the government does an awful lot of functions. You look at the state and local area, they provide a tremendous amount of retail services to consumers, whether it's everything from Social Security activity to a whole host of other things. There are a lot of federally funded, but executed more locally. At the federal level, it's everything from the Department of Defense all the way back into similar services. And they're just like big businesses in many ways, and they have to get in the same modernization. They're under the same cost pressures and delivery pressures, honestly, constituency pressures. I mean, one of the things that's changing the whole world is that we have a whole generation of people coming up behind us that have done nothing but operate off their phones. If we can't deliver that to them across their lifespan, they don't like it. So, I mean, governments are under those same pressures for effectiveness and efficiency, and most of them are trying to drive at that. But probably even more importantly is wrapping the security around it as well. And I think what we're going to see over time is state and local governments are going to have to look at how they can go to more work with larger groups to do more service bureau work, because there's just way too many governments trying to do the same kind of activities.
And finally, Mark, what impact do you think the Biden administration will have on the government's adoption of private sector innovation in relation to the secure cloud solutions and other technologies you mentioned?
I think that we're going to see a real strong push. We saw in the proposed stimulus package related to the COVID relief, there was $10 billion worth of effectively targeting cybersecurity in there. I do believe with some of the officials that were in previous administrations that are back, and others that many of them understand the importance of the private sector. Government has always struggled because many times at the federal level, particularly, they've thought, well, we can do it ourselves. But even inside places like the intelligence community, we're seeing more and more receptiveness to this. So I think it's going to be critical if we're going to be successful, if the Biden administration is going to be successful in this drive to a more secure and more capabilities available to not only the government, but its constituents, they're going to have to embrace the private sector. And I think you're going to see a lot of focus there.
All right, Mark, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you, Jill.